However, in a way, the Mediterranean at this time tells a story of shared inability. The British cannot effectively stop or damage the convoys sailing between Naples and Tripoli, and the Axis seems unable to do the same to the British convoys between Egypt and Greece. Each side is so busy organizing and protecting its own convoys that there simply are not enough forces left to make any meaningful attack on the enemy at the same time. This is something even admitted by Italy's Naval Chief of Staff, Arturo Riccardi. While the British do a little better than the Axis, managing to sink at least 2 merchant ships in February, that still is not much. But while British naval forces are already stretched thin, even more jobs are given to them by London. The Mediterranean is only one sea, and the British also have problems elsewhere. On the 6th, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill issues the Battle of the Atlantic Directive. While the Axis may not have had much success in the Mediterranean, the Germans have been greatly successful in sinking British convoys in the Atlantic. In fact, they have been so successful that the Prime Minister feels forced to send more resources to fight that threat. Just last month, the Germans managed to sink 69 ships there, carrying 317,000 tons of cargo. For the Commonwealth forces in North Africa and on Malta, this means that in the coming weeks and months, they cannot expect anything beyond the forces already there and not already busy with Operation Luster in Greece. So on the 11th, a war. Council meeting takes place in Alexandria, Egypt. Anthony Eden, the British Foreign Secretary, is there, as is General Sir John Dill, Chief of the Imperial General Staff. Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Longmore, Commander of RAF forces in the Middle East, and General Archibald Wavell, Commander of British Ground Forces in the Middle East. What is the goal of this gathering of the who's who of the British military? To revise the strategy for the whole Middle East, and more specifically, to complete the reinforcement of Greece and give regional orders. The generals, Admiral, Air Marshal, and others soon come to the sad conclusion that beyond Luster and the fighting in Greece, there is nothing else left to give. Naval offensive operations across the whole Mediterranean have to be shelved, and in North Africa, Wavell's token force will have to be enough. No meaningful reinforcements can be spared for the moment, neither for Malta nor for North Africa. Not that the British feel any need to send reinforcements to Tobruk and Benghazi anyway. To them, in general, there seems to be no threat there at all. At least this week ends on a positive note for the British. The United States passes the Lend-Lease Act. If the German submarines in the Atlantic can be stopped, much-needed resources could flow from the U.S. to Britain with far less red tape than before. On the German side, the last 2 days of this week, the 10th and the 11th, are less dramatic. On the 10th, Rommel visits an engineer depot and checks on the making of Molotov cocktails to fight armored vehicles. And he ends this week on the ground at Arco dei Fileni and orders the occupation of the oasis at Marata, despite Garibaldi's warning. Once the Italians are ready, they can take over. Rommel notes in his diary, "Enemy attempts to choke off our supplies by naval action in the Mediterranean and air attack against Tripoli achieved no great success at this stage." On 11 March, the 5th Panzer Regiment completed its unloading in Tripoli. This force, with its modern equipment, made a tremendous impression on the Italians. And here I will end this week in North Africa. A great deal is happening, though. For the moment, outside developments decide the reality, like the war in the Atlantic or the situation in Greece and the Balkans. So North Africa is, for now, at best a sideshow to the larger war still consuming Europe. Unlike Wavell, though, Rommel is not satisfied with how things stand. Energetic and charismatic as ever, he has a clear goal in mind, to push the British out of Benghazi and, if possible, out of the African continent altogether. And that is a great danger for the British, and one they had better understand before. It is too late. Exciting stuff. And I will be here over the coming weeks of this miniseries to tell you how it turns out. Whichever way that may be, I can do that thanks to the Time Ghost Army. That is what allows us to make all of our productions. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army, and Tobias Eliasson is this week's Africa ally. You too can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And if you want to see that Sedan miniseries, here's episode 1 right there. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time. That is why Rommel already has plans for Ariete and its company of medium tanks. But before he can get to that, there is a movie screening to attend. Sieg im Westen, Victory in the West, is a German propaganda film first shown to German generals last August about the German victory over France and the Low Countries. It mixes captured footage with staged reenactments to praise the Wehrmacht and its fast victory, like the film's fully staged capture of the French fort at La Ferté, filmed days after the Germans had already passed that position. If you want to know what part La Ferté played in the Battle of France, then check out our Sedan miniseries. It was a really good miniseries. I'll have a link at the end. Rommel seems to enjoy the show and also makes hopeful comments about the future. A gala showing of Victory in the West was given here today. In welcoming the guests, and there were a lot, some with ladies, I said I hoped the day would come when we would be showing Victory in Africa. Whether Victory in Africa will ever be made is a very different question. And at this point you certainly cannot say which side would be the winner. Though on the 5th and the 7th, steps are taken toward making that goal real, and with some effect. The anvil of Malta keeps being hit hard by the hammer of the Luftwaffe. And as I said last time, if the defense of Malta does not improve, British command may be tempted, or rather forced, to remove their bombers from the island. That happens this week. After especially heavy raids on March 5th and 7, Air Vice Marshal Maynard reported that he was unable to protect the Sunderlands and Wellingtons, and with great reluctance felt forced to advise that they be removed. That is no surprise given that the size of Fliegerkorps X, the Luftwaffe unit based in Sicily and North Africa that is attacking them, nearly doubles this month to about 440 planes, so the destruction on Malta is likely to get even worse. In North Africa on the 6th, more German troops finally reached the front lines, now far to the east of Tripoli, and only about 30 kilometers from Mersa el Brega, the forward British post. The 4th and 5th batteries of the 33rd Flak Regiment, an anti-aircraft regiment, parts of 3rd and 2nd Recon, as well as half of the supply echelon of Panzer Regiment 5, arrived there that day. Rommel also meets with the newly arrived German Fliegerführer Africa, Major General Fröhlich. Fröhlich is in charge of those parts of the 10th Fliegerkorps stationed in Africa. Right, the man whose job is to give Rommel clear skies over the IE front lines and beyond. Then on the 7th, Rommel meets with Italian High Command, especially with the Commander-in-Chief of the Italian Armed Forces in North Africa, Italo Garibaldi. Okay, I said at the beginning that Rommel gains new troops both in reality and in theory. So how can you gain troops in theory? Well, if you are an energetic commander who often struggles with the chain of command and with following orders exactly, and you already have units under your control by the time you officially receive command of them, right? This is more or less the story of Rommel and the Italian Armored Division Ariete. You may remember the Santa Maria column from several weeks ago, an agile and mobile motorized mixed and matched response force made up of different Italian units. It was one of the very first units Rommel sent east, and it included tanks from Ariete. So when Rommel now officially gets command of Ariete from Garibaldi at this meeting, it is more of a formal step than anything else. By now, Rommel has also managed to change the role the Italian High Command wanted to give him, commander of a mobile reserve behind the front, into the role of commander of all units on the fighting front. Rommel gives Ariete its first official orders. That unit, with its roughly 80 tanks, will move eastward. It is to head toward the 5th Light Division Command at Arco dei Fileni. However, it will stop short of it. Once in place, Ariete will carry out an important task. If Rommel wants to move farther forward, which he does, he needs to protect his rear from an unlikely, but still possible, flanking move by the British. For now, that is the job of the Ariete Division. There is also something else Rommel wants: to occupy the oasis at Marada, about 120 kilometers south of the British and Commonwealth troops at El Agheila. However, here Garibaldi has to put his foot down. Occupy the oasis? Yes, but not just yet. Garibaldi thinks Maratha can be occupied, yes, but only in an operation linked to a move on El Agheila. Otherwise, any garrison left at Maratha, which would be fairly small, could be swept away by enemy armor from El Agheila. Garibaldi urges Rommel to take his time and move up the Brescia Division, one of the 2 divisions of the Italian 10th Corps, also under Rommel's command, at least in practice, in 15 days' time. It looks like the Italians will be in charge of protecting the German flank and rear for now. But this raises the question, why would Rommel use his only armored division for a rear area job? Well, that is because by March 8th, Arrieta is not the only armored force Rommel has available. On that day, the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Panzer Regiment arrives at Tripoli. On the 10th, the 1st Battalion, the rest of the regiment, arrives as well. This means Rommel's strength has just grown a lot. Now about 120 German tanks are under his command. The British almost certainly know that these tanks are coming, maybe even that they have already arrived. However, air or naval reconnaissance can only tell you so much. What the British under Archibald Wavell's Middle East Command in Cairo do not know is that the Panzer IIIs and IVAs arriving here are different from what they faced before in Europe, or that the Germans have made some changes to their anti-tank units as well. The tanks have extra face-hardened armor plates. The Panzer III's 37mm gun has been replaced by a short-barreled 50mm gun, and the 37mm anti-tank guns have been replaced by long-barreled 50mm guns. British intelligence does at least hear that Hitler has personally ordered flak units to strengthen the North African defenses. That includes more of the 88s, which had already proved to be real tank killers during the Battle of France, though it seems British intelligence is not really aware of what they can do just yet. British intelligence will improve its game in the coming days and weeks to superhuman, nay, ultra-human levels. More on that as it develops. But this gap in British understanding of German armor and anti-tank strength will likely bring a hard reckoning for the forces in the field. Those forces in the field have other things on their minds, though. On the 9th, the Italians begin their spring offensive, not in Africa, in Greece. There are about 35 German divisions waiting in Romania to join the fight. The British are expecting a German offensive there at any moment. Balancing German involvement and helping their allies in Greece is the main thing filling the mind of British theater commander Archie Wavell. That is where almost all available troops, equipment, and supplies from Africa are now headed, and it is what the great majority of Royal Navy and Royal Air Force assets in the Mediterranean are busy with. To help that effort, many ships have already left Africa for Greece. However, the Regia Marina, the Italian Navy, is not going to just stand by and give them control of the seas. On the 6th, an empty British convoy is returning to Egypt. At 7:13 a.m., aboard the escort ship Greyhound, a British destroyer, the Aztec operator picks up an Echo about 870 meters from the convoy. After the contact moves, one thing is clear: submarine contact. The crew reacts right away. Depth charges are dropped and set to explode between 30 and 75 meters below the surface. Unfortunately for the Italian submarine Amphitrite, hiding 55 meters beneath the waves, the British are exactly on target. The submarine is damaged and forced to surface. The Greyhound at once greets its enemy with a shot from its 4.7-inch main. Guns. The first shell misses, the second slams right into the conning tower, killing 5 Italian submariners at once. A boarding party is put together, and the British manage to capture the rest of the crew and some interesting documents. Then, the submarine is scuttled. March 5, 1941. The port of Tripoli, the capital of Italian Libya, is full of activity, moving to the steady beat of the German Africa Corps. This week, German commander Erwin Rommel receives new troops, both in real life and, in a way, on paper. I'll explain. The situation at sea and in the air stays mostly the same, although events outside North Africa still play a big part in what happens here. I'm Indy Nidell, and welcome back to this World War II in Real-Time North Africa mini-series. This week, we will understand more deeply why history does not happen in a vacuum. At 9 a.m. on March 5th, The last parts of the 6th Naval Supply Convoy from Naples are unloaded at Tripoli. This time, though, it is more about adding brains than muscle to the Africa Corps. Some regimental officers from the 5th Panzer Regiment, together with the combined headquarters staff of Machine Gun Battalions 2 and 8. The 8th is already here, while the 2nd will arrive later this week. I'd like to look at how Rommel begins this week. He writes to his wife, "Dearest Lou, everything is going fine. A lot to do. Can't leave here for the moment, as I could not be answerable for my absence. Too much depends on my own person and my driving power. My troops are on their way. Speed is the one thing that matters here." Since speed is on Rommel's mind, on the 5th he inspects Italian tanks. We know Rommel does not think much of the L3 tankettes, the light tanks that make up most of the Italian armor in North Africa. Yet even as German forces have been arriving little by little, Italian reinforcements have been doing the same. Operation Compass, the British attack that destroyed the Italian 10th Army and captured many of its vehicles, has left Italian armor in terrible shape, at least when it comes to equipment. Basically, all modern Italian armor in North Africa was destroyed or captured. So Rommel is glad that by now one whole battalion of new M1340 Italian medium tanks has been added to the Ariete Division, the only Italian tank division now in North Africa. These tanks have been arriving piece by piece, though. Remember the Italian freighter Tripovich, sunk by HMS Upright 2 episodes ago? It was carrying some of them. Even so, it will still take a while before they can fully replace the old L3. Light tanks. The L3 weighs only about 3.5 tons and is armed mostly with machine guns or flamethrowers. Let's also remember that Italy first planned to be ready for war in 1943, not 1940. So there is little doubt that those tanks, designed in 1933, with versions in 1935 and 1938, were never meant to be the backbone of Italian armor in battles against strong British and Commonwealth forces. The M1340, on the other hand, is designed with exactly that job in mind. It weighs about 14 tons, still on the lighter side compared with the tanks we see at this point in the war. The Matilda II and the Panzer III, for example, weigh about 27 and 22 tons, in that order. It also has much more punch than the L3s. Its 47mm gun can punch through armor up to 30 m thick at 1,000 meters. However, good is not great. While the M1340 is in many ways equal to British armored fighting vehicles, like with its top speed of a little over 30 km/h, it is also worse in many other ways. And as we have seen, the Matilda II has front armor more than 70 mm thick. So, because of that, the main Italian tank tactic has to be a straight charge to about 400 meters or so, where their guns have a chance of breaking through British armor. The problems do not end there. Most, if not all, of the tanks now east of Tripoli, the early production models, suffer from serious mechanical problems because testing was rushed and production was hurried. The Italians are working hard to fix these problems, but that will take time. Also, the tank's own armor is pretty weak, with a maximum of 30 mm at the front. It is also riveted, and the tank has a tall shape, so sometimes they may end up just sitting there like easy targets. Still, the M1340 is a welcome addition to Rommel's forces. He knows you have to work with what you have, not dream about what you wish you had.